Hey everyone, so we're going to switch gears a little bit, but we're actually going to still build on the previous example of kind of optimizing our code using using IDs in classes, click handlers. But I've switched back to, if you guys clone out your code from your chart, your dynamic data chart, so the one that came from the Google visualization, where you put in that where clause, and so we pulled some data back from that. I'm going to show you guys how to, right now this doesn't do anything, of course. You can see that I pulled in the Bootstrap library because I've got these nice buttons here. And I've just kind of added them as divs below my regular chart. But we're going to say, okay, you know, what if we wanted the users to be able to select a year, right? Or in this case, I'm doing it as a year since, right? So starting at 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, right? So again, you can see that I've gone with this idea of using a convention. So I have my classes, my success button classes, and then I have created IDs, which I don't generally like. It's a little problematic sometimes to start the names of things with a digit. So in a case like this where the digit is the controlling factor, I tend to precede it with something. So, and I find underscores or dashes kind of helpful characters to be able to break on or split on. So we'll see how that's done in just a second. But you can see that I still have intact the value that's likely going to be important to me, which is the year. So by default, I haven't sort of handled the default state yet, but that's something you always want to think about when you do have sort of user options, is like what's the default, and also how can I make the thing, how can I appropriately update all of the parts of this thing that I need to update. So you know, you can see that here I just have hard coded. You know, it says the title is unemployment since 1980, and you know that happens to be this one, but how would I actually go about making this so that the user can make some selections? So again, this should all be kind of familiar because this is existing code that you guys all have. And I'm just going to point out that, you know, we have our page loaded function here and we have our get request here. And oops, that was not what I meant to do. How do we minimize you? Sorry about that. Okay, here we are. Don't really want this actually. Don't really want any of this, so I'd like to make my window bigger. There we go. All right, so in this case, I kind of want to minimize this too. All right, anyway, I'm not going to waste time with this. So one thing that I want to do right off the bat, I'm going to create a variable that represents the main part of my query string, right? So this is actually going to be everything but the variable, which in my case is going to be the date, right? So I sort of have this thing where I'm saying, look, I want all of this stuff. I'm going to say, you know, I want everything since 1980, everything since 1990, et cetera, right? So rather than kind of have this entire huge chunk of a string here, I'm actually going to create a global variable. So I'm going to say, look, var table endpoint, var table URL, right, is going to be, is going to be this piece, right? And then I also want to say, look, also, you know, there are actually a lot of reasons why we wouldn't want to put the key that way, but I will do this. Right, and so now I have it just saved references to both of these sort of pieces of information, meaning that when I want to construct a new query, well, that's fine. Meaning that when I want to construct a new query, all I need to do is pop in the date, right? All I need to do is say, look, take the first part of that thing, put the date that I want to start at in, and then, you know, add the rest of this on, and then do what you need to do. So so the first thing that I want to do, right, is I need to actually create the click handlers for my buttons, right? So we remember how to do this now from the last one. So I'm going to go ahead and say, look, for you know, this class, button success, and obviously I could use a different color here, but we'll just go with that. Okay, so button success, I'm going to say I'm going to do this as a named click handler, right, rather than an anonymous function, because that's how I like to roll. Click, I'm going to call this button handler, right? I could probably use a more descriptive name, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. All right, so hopefully this, so I'm now going to create my function, button handler, and I'm going to give it E because, again, I'm going to be using the ID of those buttons to grab some salient information And just to make sure this is working okay and I don't have any errors, I'm going to say, I'm going to log eTarget ID. Okay, so let's see if this is working properly. Pull up my console. Okay, looks like that worked, and there we go, I've got the appropriate ID. Okay, so I've got my ID. Now, of course, I need to break this into something useful, right? Basically, I need to kind of break off the part that has just the year in it, which fortunately is not going to be too hard to do because there's just that underscore. So I'm going to say var my ID equals, so first I want to say, you know, here's the string. Okay, so this is actually a string. eTarget ID, and this is going to look kind of weird. In fact, I might, no, I'm going to say, I'm going to have two separate variables. I like to keep this stuff clear. So the ID, this is the ID, and my year is going to be my ID.split, right? Because that's a string function I can use to split on something, and say, look, split that on the underscore, and then I want you to take, so that is, the result of that is actually going to be an array. I'm shorthanding a little bit here, and then I want the second piece of that array. So when this splits, it's going to split into the first part and the second part. I want the second part, but of course the index of the second part is 1. So hopefully I can console log my year, and I should have just the digits there. Okay, and there we go. So far so good. So now the question is, how do I, you know, pass this on to, how do I pass this information along to my table? Now, the reality is that there's only a couple of things that I need to deal with in terms of generating this new chart. In point of fact, I really just need to call this GET request again, but I need to call it with a new date in it. So I can actually just say right in my button handler here, look, I want you to do this. I'm going to not use this big long string, and in fact, I think I'm going to update it even in my main version. So now instead I'm going to say, oh, that's weird, table URL. Huh. That seemed like a reserved word for a second. See how that was colored weirdly? All right. So I'm going to say, look, I want you to get this, it's going to be my table URL plus, in this case, now, so this kind of comes to our quotations issues again, right? I need those single quotes. So I have to have first a single quote by itself, right? And then I need to, it's always going to want to put too many in, okay? And then I need to put in my year, right, which is going to be whatever the value of my year is, and then 0101, and then I need to add back, so this is a little tricky, I know, oops. Then I need to say, oh, and by the way, I also need to add that key parameter, which I've called my key. Okay, so what we've got here is we have a single asterisk, and then we have my year, and then the 0101, and then in the beginning we have the table URL, in the back we've got the my key. And we can pass this to the same event handler, because what's going to happen? It's just going to say, look, it's the same format of data, right? The same format of data is coming back. I'm just going to reconstruct it, and then I'm just going to go ahead and say, look, I want you to put it in that same div that I had it in. So it's going to hopefully kind of scoop out what was already there. It'll just replace what was already there with a new chart. So let's see how we do. I'm going to put a console log on this. Right, so we should see this come up once and then again after I hit a button. Okay, so we loaded data. And there you go. Look at that. See how the data is changing here? We're getting a different range. So this is a really simple method for changing it. Now we do have one problem still, which is that we still have this, the title says since 1980. So there are a couple ways we could handle this. We could actually, probably the simplest way would actually be to not have a title directly on the chart, but instead give ourselves a separate div above the chart that's, you know, div equals chart title. and say, input this here. Okay, and then we actually have one, we still have, so if I do this way, right? I've got that title, and then what I can do is I can replace the contents of that title straight from here, right? Straight from my click handler, right? So I can say, okay, look, you know, I know I have that div that I made that I'm putting the title in. Again, we'd want to have styling and stuff like this, so I'm going to call this, you know, look, get the chart title, and I want you to replace the contents with the appropriate year. And so we have 1980 default, but I changed it to 1990. Oops. Didn't quite work. Ah. Missing a hashtag. That would help. So 1980. Yay. Okay, so that's one bit there. I have to add a space here. Now the final thing is that I'm still not quite in the place that I would like to be with my quote DRI, my don't repeat yourself, because actually I have two separate places that the get is happening here. And so rather than sort of doing this separately and manually setting things up, what I really want to do is say, look, I want to start on a value that exists that is equivalent. It's the equivalent of one of the buttons I've already clicked, right? This might not be the case in your particular visualization, but very often it is. We're basically sort of setting a default. So what I'm going to do is say, look, instead of doing this, I want you to act like I clicked a button. And this is a little interesting because we have to essentially create a fake event so that our button handler can get the event with the appropriate values in it. So this is how we're going to do it. So basically, just the same way that we are able to say, look, I want you to put a click handler in this, I can also say, hey, I want you to grab a particular button from the page and act like the user clicked it. And this is actually very straightforward with jQuery. I think they've actually improved this because I thought this was going to be trickier than it was. But basically, again, I can use my, let's say I want it to be since the year 2000, right? Or I guess I'll use 1980 since that was the one we were using. I'm basically just grabbing the button by its div, and I'm just saying, hey, hey script, act like the user already clicked this. And if I do that, I can see that I actually get exactly the same result. So I've done what I've been able to accomplish here is not only get something that responds to user input and responds dynamically to user input in a sense, right? By breaking up my query into the main, by sort of factoring out just the thing that I need to be able to change, right? Using my sort of convention over configuration to make use of the fact that I can make these IDs whatever I want. I can make them informative. I can make them significant. And then actually creating, now obviously I have to create this click handler before I can say click on that button, right? And notice also that I did this in the Google loaded handler, right? So that I know that my visualization is ready to go and I can call that library. But I now have kind of like a very nice efficient and concise way to manage user input as well as set a default on my page. If we have time, maybe a week after next, we'll take this a little bit further and deal with that idea of kind of having a permanently shareable link. But I think what you can see is that if I put 1980 somehow in the query string and then set up code that would pull that query string from the URL, right? So instead of just index.html, it was like, year equals 1980 or 1990. If I could pull that value from the query string, I could very easily use that in my code here and just say, look, whichever thing you found in the query string, grab that button div and then act like that was clicked. So anyway, hopefully this has been helpful. I look forward to seeing you guys on Tuesday and hope you had a great weekend.